staying on the subject of puppets, we'll take a look at this clown here. I'm going to show you a clip of Ed Miliband. What's important is not what he says, but how many times he says it. Just watch this.
These strikes are wrong at a time when negotiations are still going on, but parents and the public have been let down by both sides because the government has acted in a reckless and provocative manner. After today's disruption, I urge both sides to put aside the rhetoric, get round the negotiating table and stop it happening again.
I listened to your speech in Wrexham and you talked about the Labour Party being a movement. A lot of people in that movement are the people who are on strike today, and they'll be looking at you and thinking, well, you're describing these strikes as wrong. Why aren't you giving us more leadership as a leader of the Labour movement?
At a time when negotiations are still going on, I do believe these strikes are wrong. And that's why I say both sides should, after today's disruption, get round the negotiating table, put aside the rhetoric and sort the problem out. Because the public and parents have been let down by both sides. The government's acted in a reckless and provocative manner.
I spoke to Francis Moore before I came here, and the tone he was striking was a very conciliatory one. Do you think there's a difference between the words they're saying in public and the attitude they're striking in private in these negotiations? Are there negotiations in good faith, would you say?
What I say is that the strikes are wrong when negotiations are still going on, but the government has acted in a reckless and provocative manner in the way it's gone about these issues. After today's disruption, I urge both sides to get around the negotiating table, put aside the rhetoric, and stop this kind of thing happening again.
It's a statement you've made publicly, and you'll make to me, and this will be broadcast obviously, but have you spoken privately to any union leaders and expressed your view to them on a personal level, would you say?
Well, what I say in public and in private to everybody involved in this is get around the negotiating table, put aside the rhetoric and stop this kind of action happening again. These strikes are wrong because negotiations are still going on, but parents and the public have been let down by the government as well, who've acted in a reckless and provocative manner.
You're a parent, I'm a parent, a lot of people watching this will be parents. Has it affected you personally, this action? Has it affected your family, your friends? I mean, and what is the net effect of that going to be on parents having to take a day off work today?
I think parents up and down the country have been affected by this action, and it's wrong at a time when negotiations are still going on. Parents have been let down by both sides because the government has acted in a reckless and provocative manner. I think that both sides should, after today's disruption, get round the negotiating table, put aside the rhetoric and stop this kind of thing happening.
Yeah. All right. 5 times. 5 times he said exactly the same thing. Now, what that tells me is that those words have been written down and pretty much learned. And I would ask the question, who has written those words? Has he written them and learned them? Someone else written them and learned them? If someone else has written them and he learned them, that means he's 100% a puppet. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he wrote them down and learned them. Is that the behaviour of a leader? Not in my opinion. The only thing that we should be saying to the likes of Ed Miliband, and I would include David Cameron, Theresa May and Hague and the lot of them, the only question we should be getting involved with them is take me to your leader. That's it. Because he's not the leader and neither is David Cameron. And this is what we need to be exposing in British politics. The fact that they're all puppets and are answerable to unseen puppet masters. Take me to your leader. And what about the interviewer there, the journalist, who sat there and happily listened to the same answer 5 times? He's part of the same puppet show. So our media are just as much to blame for the trash that they present us with. All right. Now, I suspect that those who are running the show, who are manipulating people like Ed Miliband and David Cameron, the real power in our country, are also running a subversion and demoralisation campaign. And they're using the law, they're using the media and various other strands in order to demoralise the public, with the intention of making the public impotent and not capable of opposing certain decisions that are going on behind the scenes. And I come to this conclusion because I've looked at the work of Yuri Bezmenov. Bezmenov was a former KGB agent who defected to the West in the 1980s, and he gave lectures on how Soviet Union were trying to demoralise their population in order to subvert and destabilise them so that they can be steered in any direction, right? And then controlled, become subservient to the state. And you've only got to look at his subversion chart to see so many striking similarities between what's going on in Britain today and what they were doing in Soviet Russia. So I'm going to just give a few quick examples. In education, he said that we need to create permissiveness, which is a lack of rules, resulting in ignorance. In the media, monopolise and manipulate it to create an uninformed myopia. Myopia meaning you're not able to see the big picture. I think we've definitely got an uninformed myopia on the Madeleine McCann case because the media has been manipulated and monopolised. All the proof of that is in my documentaries. But that's not the only subject where we have a manipulated media. The London bombings, 9/11, the list is endless. And we do have an uninformed myopia, anyone who believes what they read in tabloid newspapers. So there's another example of where Yuri Bezmenov's chart is lining up with what's going on in Britain today. In culture, create false heroes and role models. Pop idol, Premier League footballers. On every poster that you come past is Premier League footballers. Are they really the heroes of today? They're false heroes and role models. Okay, now in the area of life, I'm going to drill down into this area, family and society, break it up in order to create loyalty to the state. Now I think in Western democracies, it's not just loyalty to the state, I think there's loyalty to corporations as well, because they're promoting consumerist materialism. They're trying to get people to overconsume, which ties into this one here, of health, create junk food, and then ending up with enfeebled masses. You've just got to look around you to realise that people are not living healthy lifestyles and ask the question, is that a manipulation or is it by accident? I say it's by manipulation. So let's just look at these areas of breaking up the family and breaking up society. Just imagine that society is this wall and you are one brick in it. We're all functioning together as a society. This is what they were trying to do in Soviet Russia. Demoralise you, make you feel isolated. Now, if you're going to chop that wall up, one way of doing it is to identify certain groups of people and then make the rest of society detest them or hate them. So this is what they're doing. They're identifying particular groups in society and they're producing television documentaries in order to get people to hate them. Now, let's just say that these green blocks represent people on benefits. I showed this clip in my last talk. I'm going to show it again. What is the psychological effect of this type of documentary?
Julie and Vinny Bienvenue are also experts on life on the dole.
I need a beer.
No.
I really need a beer. Yeah, I need a beer.
These newlyweds are part of Britain's record number of long-term unemployed. No work for more than 6 years. And their only hard graft is working the system.
People find it easier to live off the government because they get most of the things paid for them. And yeah, it is easy doing that. And then you got people that don't want to work and can't be asked, and they find it easy to claim benefit. And I don't know how they justify that. I'm in that position, yeah. I'll hold my hands up, yeah.
At the end of the day, you'd be better off going for the VIP one because it's included.
Julie and Vinny want more. Julie gets sickness benefit, 310 quid a fortnight. All of Vinny and Julie's 9 children are living on benefits. They're the next welfare generation. Julie has to ring up the dole office to check just how much cash they've got coming in.
But can you possibly tell me how much will be going into my bank, please?
And with unexpected cash in the bank, it's time to spend.
Hopefully I can get me money out.
But they spend more on fags and their TV package than they do on food and other basics. Housing benefit is one of the largest chunks of Britain's welfare bill.
The cheeky twat.
Vinny has secured the new home they wanted in the space of just a few days.
Fucking lift up.
I'll have a coffee.
Julie hasn't had a job for 6 years. But the future's bright for Julie and Vinny in Liverpool. It's an arrangement that somehow gets them more benefits. And the cable TV man is back. So, spirits are high. Short of getting a job, life couldn't be rosier.
Now, these documentaries are very successful. People who get taken in by them, they spit poison at the people who've been duped to take part in them. And they have been duped to take part in them. Because this is the poster that Channel 5 used to recruit people for that documentary. What is life really like on benefits? Channel 5 is making a new documentary series looking at what life is really like when you live on benefits. We are offering individuals and families the opportunity to speak about their personal experiences. Do you struggle to survive? Are there no jobs in your hometown? Do you think the system is generous enough? This was actually on a wall in a pub in Merthyr Tydfil. I took a photograph of it. It doesn't say, are you on benefits and proud? No one is on benefits and proud, let's face it, right? So these documentaries, they're not exposés of people who are working the system. They're there to make you hate a large section of the population in order to demoralise. I mean, you've just got to go into the news agents any day and you'll see benefit bashing stories. I blow my benefits on baby spray tans. Is that really the exposé of someone who's abusing their benefits? I don't think so. There's an ulterior motive. Now, I wanted to find out what other TV shows people find subversive, so I put this appeal out recently. I'm starting a Richplanet league table of the most subversive shows on television. So if you want to suggest which programs you think are being subversive and why, please go to this link where you can post your suggestion and tell me which TV program you think is the most deviously manipulative on television. I will then compile a league table of TV shows which are considered by viewers to be the most dangerous to the mind and being used to subvert. If you need some advice on where to start, why not try Channel 5's documentaries, which are a cesspit of half-truths and use highly selective editing to present blatantly orchestrated, semi-fictional narratives as some kind of real-life documentary. I'd rather watch CAC. Okay, so here are the results of that survey. I got about 100 replies to that appeal. There we go. BBC News, #1. The most subversive programme on television as voted by Richplanet viewers. So I've got some comments here. These are comments from Richplanet viewers. They're not my comments. I can vouch for the demoralising effect it has on me. Often overhearing only a single sentence of the horrors bandied so professionally on any BBC News programme is enough to sink my mood, sometimes for the day. It goes without saying that BBC One News is the worst bit of behavioural nudging in a single programme. BBC News is the most corrupt and subversive broadcast in the world. EastEnders, like having an open sewer in your living room. EastEnders is stuffed with social engineering. I used to watch it, but then after a couple of years saw it again. Baby being taken from your young mother, married men acting like horny schoolboys. It demoralises the population to make them think that this is how most people live, or the younger generation, to implant the belief that security and stability aren't a part of the family anymore. EastEnders is part of a mind control programme to lower the mental ability and standard social behaviour of the mass British public. EastEnders seems to glorify and normalise criminality, family breakup, selfishness, general slobbish behaviour in a way that I had not seen in previous shows. EastEnders is where it all started to change, and I have no doubt that the now deplorable BBC is complicit in the deliberate subversion of society. The BBC as a whole now seems to be a massive and expensive instrument of mind control. Coronation Street was quite light and fun in the late 1980s, but then seemed to turn nasty as well. The millions of people who watch this sort of drivel are being subtly mind controlled over decades to accept the sorts of behaviour which in the long term can only be detrimental to society as a whole. And due to the early evening scheduling, children have grown up thinking this sort of thing is normal. Emmerdale is soap about a small yet completely amoral population in North Yorkshire. It makes the Wicker Man look like the Archers. Anyone not seen the Wicker Man? I recommend you watch it. Everything is accompanied by copious amounts of booze. The cast jump into bed with each other on the first meeting, then discuss their sex lives with all and sundry. Theft, drug dealing, drug taking and carjacking are all pardonable for our heroes. It is shown at 7 p.m. when children are having their tea. Not good role models. Like many people, I used to be young, but it would have been much more fun if only I had moved to Emmerdale. Still, I suppose I would have been safer on Elm Street, as I left out all the murders and psycho serial killers they have on there. The traditional family unit is no more. Dysfunctional relationships seem to be the norm. Violence and sexual innuendo, all designed to confuse young people's minds. EastEnders, Corrie Emmerdale and all the other soaps have a cancer victim or two. Are we being prepared for something? A new norm, perhaps, where everyone knows someone with cancer. I try not to watch the soaps, Richard, but she never has them off, so I'm forced to see and hear them. We're going to come on to that comment. It may be just coincidence that all the soap actors are riddled with cancer at the same time, but I highly doubt it. Some people actually think that this law of attraction, I think it's called, where if you spend all your days watching people with cancer and worrying about it, you'll increase your chances of getting it. Mind over matter. Is that the case? I don't know. Now, question time, that would get my vote. Number 3 on the list as the most subversive programme on television. The questions are rigged. These are Richplanet viewers' comments. After attempting to watch Question Time for the first time in a while, last night's show put the end to it for me. It is a blatantly controlled format, even down to the fixed questions and the fact the audience members need to apply to attend. I would say that one of the most subversive programmes on television is Question Time, in particular because it is hosted by David Dimbleby, one person who I would guarantee is on a second payroll. So what the viewer means there is he thinks that David Dimbleby is working for MI5. Now, we know that Jon Snow, another news anchor, was offered his salary doubled to work for MI5. Now, he turned them down and he blew the whistle on them. But I suspect that the vast majority, or if not all, of BBC anchors are working for MI5. They're not really working for the licence payer. Some questions are not allowed and some speakers are kicked out. Top of the list, BBC Question Time. In my opinion, all the people in the audience are pre-selected to ask questions. It sticks out like a sore thumb. So they're saying that not just the person who reads out the question on the card to kick the debate off, they're saying that there's people planted in the audience. Now, Question Time discussed the issue of fracking early last year in Blackburn. Now, fracking is where they're putting high-pressure water and sand deep into the earth in order to fracture the rock to try and get gas out. It's highly controversial. I've written to my MP saying to him that it's madness that they're doing this. They should not be doing it. It's highly environmentally destructive in a small country like the UK. But it seems that they're trying to introduce it. And there's a huge argument going on about it, pro-fracking and anti-fracking. But I think there's a huge lie being orchestrated about this. And I'm going to explain why. This estimate for fracking only came about at the beginning of 2013 when the BGS, that's the British Geological Survey, they brought out new figures on the amount of shale gas available underneath the UK. Right? So this is their 2013 estimate, but strangely before 2013 the figure was absolutely minuscule. 2013 figures is between 1,300 and 1,600 trillion cubic feet. So if you get 10% of that out, you feed it into houses, you're looking at between 110 and 140 years supply. That's what they're saying. This was their new 2013 estimates. But in 2012, their estimate was just 5.3 trillion cubic feet, which equates to only 4.5 months' use. Now, I've discussed this with a very switched-on geologist. The first thing he said was, the BGS are just an arm of government. You can't trust them. They're not an independent organisation, and they're all we are relying on for this huge figure of gas. Now, the other thing about the BGS is they have been used to put out disinformation in the past. They have lied in the past. 1974, in Wales, an object crash-landed in the Berwyn Mountains. Right? The army were on top of it very, very quickly. They tidied up the area and they took whatever it was away. I don't know what it was. Some people think it was a UFO. I haven't got a clue what it was. But the local people were very curious about it, so what the government did was they got the BGS to write bogus reports and tell people that it was an earthquake. There was no earthquake on the 23rd of January 1974 in the Berwyn Mountains. It was an object which crash-landed. Right? So the government rely on the BGS to put out their lies. So I question this figure hugely. The other thing the geologist said was there is no way you would be able to extract 10%. You're lucky if it's 1%, he said to me. So to me, this is a huge exaggeration. I would actually go as far as to say that gas extracted from fracking cannot make any significant difference in the energy mix of the UK. I think it's just not viable, in my opinion. So the claims are being vastly exaggerated by this anti-fracking lobby, where they're putting blockades up at fracking plants. And they're trying to get the argument whipped up. In my opinion, the amount of realistically extractable gas is being grossly exaggerated. And I've been pondering over this question for quite some time now. Now, in my last talk, I suggested that it could be being done to create an investment bubble. This is where they get lots of investors to put their money into fracking technology, and then in 5 years' time they announce, well, there wasn't as much gas as we thought, and all that money is then stolen effectively. Well, someone contacted me and they said, well, have you thought about currency wars, Richard? It could be linked to that. It's quite a complicated issue, but one thing that they can do is back currency with commodities. So the dollar was backed by gold in the 1970s, and it's possible to have energy-backed currency, right? So you could back the pound with gas. So on the reasoning that there's so much gas under Britain, it would be possible to strengthen the pound by saying, well, every pound is worth so much gas. That is something that they could do. Let's just say that they did that, and then in 5 years' time they announce, oh, we were wrong, there's no gas. What happens to the pound? Great way of getting Britain into the euro, because they're not going to get Britain into the euro by a vote. Okay? So that's a theory I'm just throwing out there. I don't know if I'm right on that. But I think this battle in fracking is being done for an ulterior motive. And just watch this debate.
Why can't communities affected by fracking have blocking powers as those offered to those near wind farms?
Yes, and for people still confused about what fracking is, the word actually comes from fracturing rock. And it's pouring water and sand and chemicals into rock and then producing gas from it. And you remember there was a great scare about whether this would cause earthquakes.
All right, so there's a little debate about it, and the fixed bit, I think is fixed, is at the end of the debate.
There are two people, one in front of the other.
So he says two people, one in front of the other. There's three people with their hands up all together. There's a woman over here. So he says, I'm going to have you, then I'm going to have you, and then I'm going to have this woman over here. So he knows who he's going to ask.
I'll get one at the back first, that's you, and then I'll come to you in front, yes.
We need to take some tough decisions now on what we have as our future energy mix, because if we don't, we're going to have power cuts, we'll have blackouts in the future, so we need to make those decisions now, rather than waiting, another 20 years before starting.
Are you in favour of fracking?
I'm in favour of a large mix of different energy sources.
Right, that's not a question. Is that what you would ask if you went on Question Time? I'm in favour of a large mix of energy sources. It's not the question I would ask. That is a contextual comment, in my opinion, which is a set-up for the next two questions.
And you, sir?
The northwest of England is obviously struggling really, really bad with this recession. This fracking is going to bring a lot of jobs into the area. It's going to give us security for a great number of years. The estimates is that there's somewhere in the region of about 6 or 7 trillion cubic feet of gas that we need to get it out. We need the money in the northwest economy.
You would be hard pushed to find anyone in Blackburn in favour of fracking, because they've been affected by it. There was an earthquake which a lot of people said was caused by their house prices have come down. So just randomly choosing a member of the audience, you're not going to get a pro-fracking person.
You're objecting to that. What are you saying?
Absolutely. It's not bringing jobs in. There's been 4 wells fracked in the Fylde. 2 have failed. No inquiry why they failed, no fines, no regulations. I believe the HSE has never been to these sites for 2 years. There's terrible things happening in America, in Australia, in Canada. We've had people over telling us about what they've had. People are breathing these gases in. All these chemicals are in the ground. Some of them are coming out. We've got to have proper regulations.
Margaret James.
Well, I quite agree there does need to be regulation, and there does need to be a look at the safety implications, but we cannot afford as a country, we can't afford in the northwest, and we certainly can't afford as a country to reject this opportunity. I think we've got to look to see if we can make it work. It has made such a huge difference to the economy.
But is she right that it's already gone wrong? You're behind. Hold on, you can't, Matthew, because I haven't brought in Em.
Wrong.
What?
It's gone wrong.
Em Wilson, do you know about this?
I think that local people are the only people who can stop these things. Look at all the lies that they were told in the 1950s about nuclear power stations. Now people riddled with cancer and all sorts of horrible diseases. They'll lie and lie and lie to you, and you're the only people who can stop it.
Very brief.
See, I just look at Dimbleby in instances like this. Dimbleby knows.
fracking is we've got to be much more
manipulating that whole debate, Dimbleby.
It's a beneficial effect. Is we are a much smaller and much more heavily populated country, and in America they can do it well away from population centres.
Okay.
If you start doing it in the northwest, you get it rippling all the way up the valley.
1,500
feet away from a school.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've heard the point, and
But we never get. Why are we not getting our voices heard?
Your voice.
Everybody is not allowing it to be heard.
Your voice has been heard by over 3 per.
Now compare that with 9/11 campaigners. Have you ever seen a 9/11 campaigner given that much voice on Question Time? No way. Or 7/7 or other issues. So in my opinion, they need this argument for some reason.
Maybe 3.5 million people right now, and I'm grateful you making
With
well, I can't do anything, but you're recording.
Okay.
Our time's up.
So
we're going to be in Edinburgh next week. We have an.
I don't know what's going on with this fracking issue, but I smell a big pork pie. Okay, let's look at some other programmes which people suggest are subversive. So daytime chat type shows this morning, Breakfast TV, The One Show, Loose Women. Anyone watch that? No one prepared to admit it, eh? All right. The One Show often have little tidbits of false information that offer an extremely narrow viewpoint with little or no alternative view. They will often frown upon any alternative views and gesture that these views are obviously stupid and incorrect. Jeremy Kyle, well, that goes without saying. Diet and cookery type programmes are subversive, according to some. MasterChef, the music and general presentation, promotes a feeling of submission and is used in a trance-like effect. And you've just got to look at Yuri Bezmenov's subversion chart to realise that diet and health is part of a subversion, or was in the Soviet Union. Promote junk food and create enfeebled masses. Enfeebled masses do not rise up against the government. I'm very curious about the rise of Greggs the bakers. Yeah? Overnight, they even have the Greggs logo. You know the blue motorway signs, Highways Agency official signs, the Greggs logo on there. And when I read the highway code when I was revising for my their driving test, I don't remember seeing those Greggs signs on the blue motorway signs. That's got to be approved from government, because those signs are heavily regulated. In Newcastle upon Tyne, where all the nightclubs are, there's a Greggs in the middle of there now. It's open till 3 in the morning. They've even got a bouncer. He's 25 stone. So Greggs is junk food in disguise. It is junk food. It's in disguise with the odd bit of lettuce and tomato, but it is junk food. So the manipulators that are running this subversion agenda, they're not interested in money, right? Because you would say, oh, well, that's just a successful baker's, Richard. It's just a company that's done well through advertising and expanded itself across the country, right? Now, I've no doubt that the managing director of Greggs probably believes that. But I think the people above him who run the central banks, where money is no object to them, it is not, because they print the money, right? As long as you do your job, Mr. Greggs, make people fat, you will continue to be a success. The subverters at the top don't really care about the money. All right, Country File, BBC Country Files. Even programmes that you think are innocent are subversive. Sunday tea time, thinly veiled exploitation of Britain's pastoral instincts in order to soften and subvert the mindset, such that concepts like climate change, renewable energy, GMO foods become indoctrinated. Agenda 21 will then be much easier for people to accept. Now, somebody has nominated Crime Watch. This is a still from Crime Watch UK, October last year, and it's a reconstruction of the Madeleine McCann case, where we've got actors playing Jerry McCann and Kate McCann, and they're at the Tapas restaurant, allegedly just before Madeleine's gone missing. And what they're doing is they keep putting their knives and forks down, and they trot off to the apartment to check on the kids. I don't think any of that happened. We've only got their statements for that, and they have stuck quite close together. There's no other evidence that they were going checking on children. Now, I'm just going to ask a question here. This programme, as I say, aired in October last year. How much money do you think this cost to produce? It's under 1 hour long, BBC Crime Watch UK, reconstruction of the Madeleine McCann thing. Anyone like to guess how much money that cost to make? That's a lot. Any others? Say again? 2 million? Well, £1 million. £1 million of your money, right? Now, go back and watch it on YouTube, and then watch my film, and you decide yourself which one you think is nearest the truth, right? People have called me a money-making crackpot for trying to make that documentary, or for making that documentary. £1 million in order to try and convince you that Madeleine was abducted. Subversion. Now, I've not mentioned children's programmes, but obviously they do influence young people's minds. One guy voted for Peppa Pig. I didn't even know what it was, so I haven't got kids. Now, he said, I nominate Peppa Pig. It targets the very young and impressionable. Its creators are supported by Channel 5 and Nick Jr. So I didn't know what it was, so I thought, well, let's find out.
I'm Peppa Pig. This is my little brother George. This is Mummy Pig. And this is Daddy Pig.
All right, that's enough of that. Right. Now, and he goes on to say, it promotes an attitude towards Daddy as silly, or makes out Daddy as incompetent at most things, primarily from Peppa, the daughter. This, I believe, eats at the true foundations of the relationship capabilities of father and daughter. I've had my daughter quote Peppa, belittling me for no reason, but with true conviction. It was teaching her and all little girls that their fathers aren't really that clever, always make mistakes, and generally are not a good choice for advice. It breaks that subconscious connection between father and daughter. So this is a guy who's really annoyed at these programmes because it breaks his subconscious connection between him and his 3-year-old daughter. And here are some examples.
Gosh! Daddy Pig! You've had this book out for 10 years!
Naughty Daddy!
Sorry, Miss Rabbit.
Daddy, we don't want to get lost.
Are we lost?
Yes. Well, I can run as far as you like.
But Daddy, you can hardly run at all.
And you must remember to bring your book back too, Daddy Pig.
I'll make sure Daddy remembers.
What if I practice eating today, then practice running tomorrow?
No, Daddy. You need to practice running now. Silly Daddy. That's just a drawing. Poor Daddy. Having to go to work.
Oh, poor Daddy.
Come on, let's play. We've lost our engine.
Lost your engine?
Yes. It's completely disappeared.
I'd like to help, but I don't know a thing about engines. I'm probably just being silly, but this looks a bit like an engine.
Ah, yes. Where shall I put Delphine's luggage?
In my room, at the very top of the house.
Oh. Did you get the envelope?
He can't hear you, Daddy. He's on television.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's a walking, talking snowman. Oh, it's just Daddy.
So this has sold 7.5 million DVDs in the UK. It goes out in 180 countries. And it's certainly affected one father's relationship with his 3-year-old daughter. And it's probably affecting millions of fathers' relationships with their 3-year-old daughters. You have to ask the question, is this content being put in deliberately for purposes of subversion, as suggested by Yuri Bezmenov? Because one thing that he says about subversion is, people think subversive practices go on in the background. No, no. They're always in your face, subversion. It's always in your face. Okay? I would suggest that is subversive. Highly damaging, in my opinion. Okay, now we come on to Operation U-Tree, which is another can of worms. I don't know whether this was an attempt to arrest and charge genuine abusers, or whether it was a psychological operation from word go. But you have to agree that the newspaper headlines from this were sensationalising it, right? Because the overriding thing that came from the media with these stories, not just Rolf Harris, other people as well, is You can't trust anyone now. You can't even trust Rolf Harris. That's the message it's sending out. Now, that wall that I had up earlier on, where the people are bricks, the cement in there is trust. That's what the cement is. Trust is what holds families together and society together. And stories like that break down trust. And you have to ask the question, is that being put out deliberately to break down trust as part of a Soviet-style subversion technique? Or is it just by random? I would suggest it's being done deliberately. Now, I'm going to talk about a psychological operation which took place recently, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Anyone who can guess what it is, shout out and I'll give you a free copy of my film. Now, I spoke in the last talk about the empire which is currently trying to engulf the world, trying to take over the world and create a one world government. And it has used 9/11 and 7/7 as an excuse to take over the Middle East. And I went through the countries that have had regime change since 9/11. So we had the invasion of Afghanistan, we had the invasion of Iraq, we had the deposing of Colonel Gaddafi, and various other countries in this region also had regime change. Here they are. Now, some people say, well, there was revolutions in some of those countries. I disagree with that. I think that there were Asian provocateurs that triggered all of those regime changes to make them more compliant to the US agenda. There were countries which did not need to be changed that were already pro-US. We'll colour them in. We're left with 3 countries which are undoubtedly targets of the US. Syria, there was a vote in Parliament last year to determine whether we were going to invade and take military action against Syria, a country that's got nothing to do with the UK. We've got no right in that country to go into it militarily. Iran, rhetoric about Iran's alleged nuclear program. Pakistan, they've been dropping drone attacks willy-nilly on that country. So those 3 countries are definitely targeted. Now, let's just look at the modus operandi of the group that's doing this, the group that is creating regime change across the world. Right? Their modus operandi, whoever they are, they've targeted countries with a low approval of the US, Islamic and undemocratic, what we would consider dictatorships. They're the types of countries they've gone for. And they've always manufactured excuses and planted them in our media before they've gone into those countries. Okay? Now I'm going to list some of their excuses that they've manufactured. So they used the excuse of 9/11 to invade Afghanistan. They used weapons of mass destruction to invade Iraq, which they didn't have. They've used Lockerbie to demonise Libya. Libya had absolutely nothing to do with Lockerbie. There's no evidence that Libya were involved in that. But Lockerbie was plastered all over our newspapers before they deposed Gaddafi. Chemical weapons is the rhetoric coming out about Syria, and Iran is nuclear weapons. So there's the modus operandi. They go for countries with a low US approval, Islamic, non-democratic, and they always think of an excuse. Now let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this group, which is trying to bring about a one-world government, chooses Southeast Asia as its next target. So we'll look at point 1 on my chart and ask which countries have a low US approval rating. Let's look at Burma. So the green represents how many people in that country approve of the US regime. So in Burma it's... Say again? Are you talking about projects for the new American century? Well, that links into this, yeah. No. So in Thailand, there is a 60% US approval rating. In Vietnam, 71% of the population approve of Barack Obama in the US. In Cambodia, it's 62. The Philippines, it's 85. Malaysia, it's 34. Indonesia, it's 38. So that's what those group of countries think of the US. Now let's look at religion, point 2 on the list. Which of these are Islamic countries? Because they're the countries that they go for. Malaysia and Indonesia are predominantly Islamic. The rest are Buddhist. I think the Philippines is Roman Catholic. Now let's look at democracy. Which of these countries are the most or least democratic? Well, you can actually look on the Global Democracy Ranking website, and Britain is position 10, the United Kingdom. This is America. And right at the bottom, the lowest one of all those countries in Southeast Asia is Malaysia. So, which country is going to be targeted in that region? We've got Islamic countries, the lowest US approval rating and the least democratic. They're going to target Malaysia, in my opinion, if they're going to go into that region and regime change it. But the modus operandi, as I explained before, they need a reason to go into Malaysia. Yeah? No one's going to believe Malaysia have got nuclear weapons. What can we do? Yeah. Anyone actually believe that the CIA or NORAD did not know where that missing Malaysian flight was? There are so many devices on that aeroplane which report back to Rolls-Royce, Boeing. CIA, NORAD would have to have known where that missing airliner was. In my opinion, all those news reports are complete bullshit. The US knew where that missing airliner was. In my opinion, this is an attempt to make Malaysia look like a tin pot dictatorship, just to nudge the public's perception into the view that Malaysia's regime really needs to be gotten rid of. Now, Barack Obama went to visit the Malaysian Prime Minister round about the time that when this Malaysian airliner was supposedly missing. And he was all the usual rhetoric, you know, the US is doing everything it can to help the Malaysian authorities find this missing plane. What a lie. Does anyone see anything in the body language of these photographs? I think Obama knows that Malaysia is on the list. And Malaysia did hold public hearings, sort of a mock trial, where they put George Bush on trial for war crimes and they voted him guilty. And they put that on state television. Right? Now, we've had other negative stories coming out of Malaysia, or stories that have come out of Malaysia that have had a negative twist put on them. So we had this guy, Gareth Huntley, went missing, and then he's found in the jungle. Now, what does that newspaper photograph say to you? It says to me, there's some kind of militaristic regime that we can't really trust, and it's putting in danger our attractive Western people, so it's a dangerous area. That's what that says to me. And there were reports that he'd supposedly had his throat slit, but I don't think there's been any post-mortem evidence of that. Obviously, it's a tragic story. Now, I read one newspaper report of the recent thing in the Ukraine, which said that, again, another Malaysian plane, they said, well, Malaysia are obviously partly to blame because they shouldn't have flown that plane over a war zone. So again, they're using these stories to demonize Malaysia, and this story made me laugh. This was just a few weeks ago. Mystery of British honeymooner who was being quizzed by police after he disappeared for 2 days in Malaysia, leaving his new bride frantic. So, guy gets married, goes on holiday to Kuala Lumpur, has an argument with his wife, goes in the huff for 2 days, and then comes back. Boom. That's the story. That happened to me once. I didn't end up in Mail Online. Right? It's a non-story. That happens every day. Why is it in Mail Online? I'll tell you why. Because they're using it to remind you of Gareth Huntley. So this story, this guy who's just wandered off from his wife, last month the body of Briton Gareth Huntley, 34, from Cricklewood, London, was found in a turtle conservation resort in Malaysia. We can't trust the Malaysians. All right? So they're using any story that they can to try and demonize their regime. So, you heard it here first. It wouldn't surprise me if there's military action in Malaysia at some point in the next 5 years. But what they have to do, they have to just do this psychological operation on the public so that it's not opposed. Now, I'm going to talk about freedom of expression because I think this links in to this agenda to break down trust in society. This is Section 5 of the 1986 Public Order Act. Up until very recently, it was illegal to insult someone, right? But the police were abusing this law. Anyone who was shouting something out in the crowd, the police were using it just to arrest them. And what is an insult to one person could be a compliment to someone else. So freedom of speech groups were really annoyed at this law, that it was being abused, and they wanted it reformed, right? So they started a campaign in May 2012 to drop that word insulting from the law. So it would not be illegal to insult people, right? Now, one person who was very prominent in this campaign was Rowan Atkinson, and he spoke about it at a news conference, or a conference, on the 16th of October 2012. I'm just going to show you some extracts from it.
My starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth. And the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life and fully expect to continue to do so. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped-up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favourites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Dear says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. A new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. The best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it.
Now, anyone remember seeing that on mainstream news? Why didn't they have their reporters there? And just one point, who would you rather have as next Prime Minister? Mr. Bean gets my vote every time. And I'm going to come on to that in a second. So what happened was there was a vote in the House of Lords, and they voted quite strongly to get rid of that word insulting because of this campaign, 150 to 54. And the government didn't oppose it, they just let it sail through, and I think they were probably aware that if they had opposed it, they would have been ridiculed by the likes of Rowan Atkinson, because it is a ridiculous law. All right, so that came into force on the 1st of February 2014, and I suspect the government weren't happy about having to change that law, because it takes away police powers of arrest. It says that you can shout things out at people if you want to, as long as it's not abusive, if it's just insulting. Now, I'm just going to write Rowan Atkinson's name next to him there. 2 months after that law was changed, right, and I think Rowan Atkinson was probably instrumental in that happening, someone with his influence and following, this newspaper headline appeared. Now, this story, right, it turned out was completely false. There was not an element of truth in it, that these giant rats had been discovered somewhere in the UK. So this is a total lie. In my opinion, the main thing that's going on in this front page is Rowan Atkinson, and that story's been put there as a subliminal, right? Rowan Atkinson, right? Look at the way that the tail is hanging down from his neck. You might ask, well, why would they do that on the front page of a newspaper? If you think about news, it is a bit more fragmented than it used to be. You have got a lot of channels on Sky, you've got the internet, but one place that still has millions of captured viewers is newspaper stands. So if 1 million people have bought that newspaper, I would suggest 10 million people have read the front page. So you've still got a vast amount of people looking at that, and that goes straight into your subconscious, right? In my opinion, this is a subconscious attempt to nudge the public to a place where they don't really approve of Rowan Atkinson. Because can you imagine Rowan Atkinson in a debate with Ed Miliband or David Cameron? He was very statesmanlike in that clip, wasn't he? He was speaking from his heart. Just compare that to Miliband, the clip that I showed you. They do not want their puppets upstaged by an intelligent, witty man like Rowan Atkinson. So this is manipulation of the worst kind, in my opinion. Subconscious planting of suggestion. Okay. Here's another subliminal. This is a Kate McCann subliminal, or McCann's story. So the bottom right-hand corner there is a separate advert, and it's for the Financial Services Authority. Why the Financial Services Authority need to advertise in the first place, I don't know. But they've chosen to put the title of their advert as The Truth, right under where it says Missing Madeline and Mum Kate. I don't think that's an accident. Okay, now, after that law changed, round about 7 or 8 months after, these ridiculous stories about modern-day slavery started appearing in our press. And they're all bogus, in my opinion. They're all exaggerations and concoctions. It's a Hegelian dialectic. So they're creating a problem, then a reaction, and then they're going to come up with a solution. And the solution is to bring in a new law, which I'm going to explain to you. But they've got to get these stories in the media first before they bring in this draconian new law. One story caught my eye as a classic, contrived Hegelian dialectic problem-reaction-solution farce. The story of 3 women rescued from a house in Lambeth after allegedly being held as slaves for 30 years. This story was put out by most, if not all, of our gutter press. The BBC website said, a Malaysian woman, 69, an Irish woman, 57, and a Briton, 30, were rescued on the 25th of October. It emerged on Thursday. A man, 73, and a woman, 67, understood to be married, were arrested in Lambeth and later bailed until January. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, said details were still emerging in Lambeth, South London, but it was clear that many other victims were hidden in plain sight across the country. It transpired that one of these so-called slaves had been working, wait for it, drum roll, in a nail bar. I'm enslaved in a nail bar, please let me out. I can assure you a nail bar is not the sort of place I would want to be enslaved in either. I spent 30 years imprisoned against my will. Oh really? Where did you do your time? Wandsworth nail bar. Really? The screws are really cruel in them nail bars. They only allow 5-minute fag breaks, and you have to stick to set fingernail designs. There is just no artistic freedom there. If a person abuses another person, do we not already have laws that deal with this? Theresa May then starts going on saying that we need to deal with modern day slavery by inventing new laws. Thousands of Geordie men will be getting locked up for being heard to utter the forbidden words, "Make me a cup of tea, pet." I then saw a psychologist being interviewed talking about how charismatic people with strong personalities can start cults with the aim of enslaving people and how we need to protect ourselves against them. So that's what this is all about, controlling people who spread ideology, or perhaps even the truth. This farcical story shows just how scared the manipulators are of certain ideas which are growing in the public mindset. Ideas that are based on truth. That's it, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state, and this applies to the UK right here, right now. New laws to clamp down on modern day slavery are being laid down to stamp out the enemy of the state, the truth. Alright, so there was a number of completely ridiculous stories about supposed modern day slavery, and then just very recently we had the Queen's speech.
A bill will be introduced to strengthen the powers to prevent modern slavery and human trafficking, while improving support for victims of such crimes.
So they've planted their bogus stories, they've created a bit of interest in it, and now the Queen is saying we need new laws, and they're intending to bring these new laws in the next Parliament. Now one thing that tells me is that the manipulators who are orchestrating all this, operating with the Crown, the government and the media, all as one, right? Because they need all three in order to be able to bring in what I'm going to describe to you in a second. Now there are two draft slavery bills, which these are proposed as going to be new laws. There's the government draft slavery bill and there's the joint committee draft bill. They both define what they mean by slavery and what they're going to make illegal. Now, the top one is the government one, the second one is the joint committee one. I'm going to selectively read the joint committee one. For the purposes of this Act, slavery means the control by a person of a second person in such a way as by which any person obtains a benefit through the use, management, profit, transfer or disposal of that second person. If I ask anyone in this audience to go to the bar and get me a pint of lager and I'll give you the money, you give me it, I've broken the law. I've broken that law. That is a law against having someone do you a favour. That's what that is. Now, this one's not quite as bad, but neither of these laws talk about whether the person has agreed to do that favour. So they're making the doing of favours or requesting a favour illegal. That's what they're trying to do. This one says P requires another person to perform forced or compulsory labour and the circumstances are such that P knows or ought to know that the person is being required to perform forced or compulsory labour. I mean, that's just completely ambiguous and I don't see how it's enforceable. I can envisage situations in 3 or 4 years' time where you might have a married couple or two friends or any sort of club where they fall out. People fall out in their day-to-day lives, yeah? So they think, all those favours I did for them, is that the police? I've been enslaved for the last 3 years. The courts are going to be full, right? Now, I ran a campaign in 2012 called Tell Your MP About 7-7, where 100 people went on my website, they downloaded some documents and printed them out and took them to their MPs. They could have me locked up for doing that if this law is passed. This is a very, very dangerous law. It's trying to make requesting favours from someone illegal. And in a place like here, the Welsh Valleys, where there is a very good community spirit, I find people will help you and will not request payment. What's it going to do? Every time you want someone to do something or are communicating with someone, you're going to be scared to ask them to do something. that's going to erode trust, isn't it? In the cement which holds us all together. Do we really want this? Because we've got laws, we've got employment law, right? We've got minimum wage. So they're not talking about employment here, right? And they're not talking about shackling someone in traditional type slavery. They're talking about what they mean by mental slavery. Sorry, what they mean by modern slavery. They mean mental slavery. They're saying we're going to try and control what you can say to someone. So they're limiting your freedom of expression. And this is very, very dangerous. Now, I've written to my MP to complain about this. I do not want this law passed. And I was going to ask you lot to do the same, but I'm not sure now, because I might get done for enslaving you. But just think about the implications of this law. This, in my opinion, is not being brought in to stop people being taken advantage of. It's the opposite. It's a Yuri Bezmenov subversion technique, and it will have a very detrimental effect on society. Now, I'm going to talk about the censorship of my TV show, because several people have asked me today, is it coming back on television? Well, I'm not 100% sure. As you may know, I got removed from TV for about 9 months because of an item that I put on where I was challenging the official line of the Woolwich incident, where some guy allegedly had his head hacked off in the middle of the street. Now, Ofcom produced this report as to why they said that my programme was offensive, and what I've done is I've taken all of their quotations from my show and I've clipped them all together. So this is why my show was taken off air.
One important factor is there is no photograph or video showing a decapitated corpse. We can see a body lying in the road, but it's not obvious whether there's even a head there or not.
Right, so you're supposed to believe that in that corner of the pavement with trees overhead, they tried to hack his head off. They suddenly got out of the meat killer, tried to hack his head off.
So this is off the road they've tried to do this?
Yeah, on the pavement.
All right.
Now that would have, about 8 pints of blood would have spurted out if they'd done that. They had blood all over themselves, which they didn't have. And the important thing is there's no blood on the pavement. You happen to have a meat cleaver, you get out, you hack his head off. Why would you want to do that? And you then drag him out into the middle of the road. It makes absolutely no sense. The only sense it makes is as a stage prop for public horror. Right, okay. So just ask yourself, if you had seen somebody hack someone's head off and got blood all over his hands with a meat cleaver, would you stand there a few feet in front of him with a camera photographing him and talking to him? Would you do that?
Of course you wouldn't.
So that is an obviously staged event, and the dead giveaway here is the little old lady with a shopping trolley who walks past, totally unconcerned, as this apparent horror event is going on. And that tells you that red blood on the hand was photoshopped on. There was no red blood on the hands. And it's only on his hands, not anywhere else on his clothing, as would have happened if
right.
You know.
So they've done a very badly orchestrated false flag event in Boston. Now they've done one in Woolwich in the UK. Can I just put this to you that you've got the people who do see through these lies, okay, such as yourself, people who actually critically analyse, look at the evidence, and see if there's any mileage in what the mainstream is saying, and then unpick it, and then we know it's all a fake event. Okay, it's easy to see.
Right, now I would have been quite happy to issue an apology if that is indeed offensive. This is one complaint that Ofcom got, and after I was taken off air, the TV company got 400 complaints from viewers. So where's the democracy there? But I would have been quite happy to issue an apology and continue on in the same vein with the same types of programmes I've been producing. But that has not been allowed to happen, because the TV company are so scared now of producing anything which questions the government's narrative or anything against, let's say, police corruption and this kind of thing, that they only want programmes about UFOs from me. That's all they're prepared to air, because they're worried about getting a £30,000 fine and getting their licence taken off them. So my hands are tied now. I can't put certain things out that challenge authority. And the other thing they've done is they've requested more money from me for the shows. So the last series of 13 shows that I put out, the TV company want £3,000 plus VAT from me. So I pay to produce the programmes, and then I have to pay them £3,000 plus VAT to get them to put them on. Right? I don't get paid to make these TV shows. So that's why I'm charging £12 instead of £10. Because I've agreed to give the TV company 30% of the proceeds from these talks. So I'm subsidising the TV show. Right? The other thing they've done is they've stuck me on at midnight, and a lot of people have been having problems recording the show as well. So and this is ongoing. Yeah, so that one incident is still affecting my freedom of speech now, because I'm not allowed to say the sorts of things that I'm saying in this talk on television. All right. So I'm not sure which direction I want to take. Am I just going to broadcast on the internet, or am I just going to do just UFO stuff and stay on television? Now, I've mentioned subversive influences, and a lot of people say, well, what can you do? Because not everyone's going to go to Portugal and try and make a documentary that's going to undermine the government and what I'm doing. But there are things that you can do, and I've had a little think about this regarding subversive influences. Here's one of them. Throw your television set out of the window. All right, if you don't want to do that, the first point is that your armour or your guidance comes from within yourself. That sounds a little bit religious, but it's true. You're not going to get it from anyone else. You're not going to get it from anything that you read. It comes from within yourself, right? Your armour against subversive influences. Try and know or learn which influences to shut off from. Write them down. I mean, I haven't even mentioned films and radio. Anyone listen to the Jeremy Vine show? That is just the most disgusting, fear-mongering. I put that on for 15 seconds before I've had enough of it. Jeremy Vine. So know or learn which influences to shut off from, and think carefully about what you put value on. So the Peppa Pig stuff that I showed you before, Peppa doesn't like nature, so they're trying to make people worship material things. They're trying to create consumerist materialism. If you don't have your health, you're not going to have any of it. Yeah. Don't spend long periods under subversive influences. I only watch the news for about 15 minutes every week. That's all you need in order to get up on the propaganda. Yeah? You don't need to sit in front of the TV for long periods of time. And give the influences labels which describe what they really are. Dancing on shite. I call Greg's dregs, and there are many others. Make them up. I call the news. I don't say, well, are we going to put the news on? I say, are we going to put the stress on? But it's not always as simple as that, is it? And it's not always the woman who's addicted to subversive influences. Sometimes it's the man, or it might be teenagers or grandparents, or whatever your situation is. You might be living in the same space as someone who can't get enough of all of this, and you just want to switch off from it. What the hell do you do? Because a lot of people contact me about that, and we saw the comment in the slide that she never has the soaps off. It's quite a tricky thing, but I've had to think about it. This comes from cognitive behavioural therapy, which can be used for the positive. It's not all mind control. So write a letter from the other person's perspective. So imagine that you are that other person, and explain to yourself why you need all of these subversive influences. That will then enable you to understand where they're coming from. Then put yourself in an imaginary trial. So there's a judge, a jury, and the other person. What would you say to that jury to convince them that all of the subversive influences are completely bad and ought to be taken away from your life? Right? And once you've done that, imagine that the other person who loves the subversive influences is drowning in a river. Now, if they were drowning in a river, would you point at them and say, stop drowning in that bloody river? Because they are drowning in a river of subversion. You wouldn't, would you? They need support. So no, it's not their fault. It's the subverters' fault. They're victims of subversion, people who are addicted to this stuff. No ticking off, right? They're victims. They need support. Talk to their heart before their head and show some compassion. Try and get them to propose a solution, an alternative to just being absorbed in these subversive influences, and then they're more likely to follow the solution. And recognise and give gratitude if they give suggestions. All right, well, if we put the lights back on now, that's the end of part one. We'll have a 20-minute break, and I'll see you in part two to talk about the secret space program. Thank you. If you've been watching the documentary when I've had it on here, you realise that it's not like a mainstream documentary because it's looking at facts and evidence. It's not looking at people's emotions or how people felt and that kind of thing. It is a fairly forensic set of documentaries. All right, part 2. Anyone who wants to look into some interesting chemtrail research, go to Andrew Johnson's website, which is checktheevidence.com. I'm just going to skip past that part, just so we'll get finished in good time. All right. Now, I'm just going to start with this statement that real problem people don't get their face on mainstream TV. And I'm going to use the example of Osama bin Laden just to explain what I mean by this statement, because I think a lot of people in this room probably know that Osama bin Laden had nothing at all to do with 9/11. There's not a single shred of evidence linking Osama bin Laden to 9/11. But there is evidence that Osama bin Laden had connections to the CIA before 9/11. So the clip I'm going to show you is of Bill Cooper speaking 3 months before 9/11 on his radio show, and he's talking about Osama bin Laden and about how Osama bin Laden was recruited by the CIA. Remember, this clip is 3 months before 9/11.
Can you believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. The FBI also, under the leadership of Louis Freeh, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years and years and years and many years, and can't find him. Some doofus, jerk-off reporter with a camera crew waltzes right into his hideout and interviews him. Now, that tells us two things. Either everyone in the intelligence community and all of the intelligence agencies of the United States government are blithering idiots and incompetent fools, including the entire apparatus of the FBI and all of their personnel, or they're lying to us. They're not looking for him at all. And the second is the truth. You see, the CIA created Osama bin Laden. They recruited him. They trained him. They found his leadership. They brought them all together. They showed them how to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and when that was over, they still continued to fund him and train him, and they're now using him to help bring about world government by making him the big boogeyman, because they can't use Saddam Hussein anymore. If I were the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, within 2 weeks I would have him dead or in custody without fail. Without fail. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth. And whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it.
Whatever's going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it. That's 3 months before 9/11. 2 months after 9/11, the guy speaking there was dead. He was shot outside his house. Now, so my statement, real problem people don't get their face on mainstream TV. Osama bin Laden was not a real problem person. He was a creation of the CIA. They wanted him on mainstream TV. Now, you can use the same litmus test for whistleblowers, Because people who give away government secrets and speak out are supposedly problem people. And if they're wanted by the government, they're not going to get their faces on TV, because the CIA or whoever wants them is going to capture them and put them in prison before they get on TV. And I would apply that litmus test to these two guys, Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. They've had masses of coverage on mainstream TV. They're not whistleblowers. They want these guys' disclosures to be known about. Now here is a whistleblower who has not been on mainstream TV, Dr. Judy Wood, and her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, I would suggest is the most important book yet written this century, because it explains in scientific terms what happened on 9/11. And she has not been allowed on mainstream TV. That tells me she's a genuine whistleblower, and all the evidence in her book tells me that she's a genuine whistleblower. Now, but I'm not going to talk about Dr. Judy Wood. I'm going to talk about another whistleblower, someone who has not been extensively covered on mainstream TV. But before I introduce him, I'm just going to talk about secret aircraft. Because if you tell people that the United States are developing aircraft in secret and they've got phenomenal capabilities and they can go really fast, most people will say, well, of course they develop aircraft in secret. That's their job. They do it to protect us. But if you were to say to that person, they've developed triangular craft which are 10 times the size of this room, along each side, 600 feet. They can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally, so they can get into space in 40 seconds from a standing start. They're silent. They can get to the moon in a couple of hours, and they can get to Mars in a few weeks. And they can traverse the solar system. They can land them on the moon or neighbouring planets and use them as bases. And they've weaponized them, and they've got them in orbit in various places. And they've been used to monitor the planet and possibly look down on us and with various different types of weapons, pick out particular countries or people. Now, would you still say the same? That you're not bothered that the US are developing secret craft if they've got that kind of capability? I think we have the right to know about it, because I think that is what is going on. And it comes from the disclosures of someone called Ed Fouché. Now, this is Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson and I recorded a TV show all about the disclosures of Ed Fouché. Now, Ed Fouché came out in 1998. He's an avionics engineer. He worked with various people on secret projects who gave him information about this particular space vehicle, right? It's 600 feet along each side. It doesn't need wings to fly. It has what's called a magnetic field disruptor, which is powered by a plasma accelerator. And I'm going to come on and I'm going to explain how this plasma accelerator creates a magnetic vortex field around the craft, which somehow disrupts the force of gravity. All right? Because most physicists will agree that at some level electromagnetism and gravity are connected, and that you can affect gravity with electromagnetics. Now, when we've put this interview out, because Andrew's done over 6 hours of interviews with Edgar Fouché, right? They're all on his website if you want to go and watch them, right? After we put that, and it was on national TV, various trolls on the internet started trying to debunk Edgar Fouché. And I had emails from viewers saying, Richard, why are you covering Ed Fouché in the TR3B? He's a liar, he's a proven liar, and he's forged one of his documents. Well, I would point you to this document written by Andrew Johnson entitled The TR3B Trolls and the Truth. Because the two people who have been trying to discredit Ed Fouché, David Hilton and a guy called Jeremy Riss, who goes by the name of Alien Scientist on the internet, Andrew suspects are government agents. And you would need to read this detailed document to understand how they have gone about trying to trash Ed Fouché's claims. Now, either one of two things is true. Either Fouché is a liar and these guys are right, or Fouché is a very important whistleblower and they're trying to trash his work because they want this leak in their secrecy plugged. And I suspect it's the latter, all right? One of them's got a criminal record and links to another disinformation organisation. But this lecture is not about this argument which is going on the internet about Ed Fouché. All right, they filmed him on Skype without his knowledge when he'd had a drink, and they were trying to put words in his mouth and this kind of thing. But I suspect that this has been done as a result of my TV show, because David Hilton actually took an extract from the TV show, and then he showed how Fouché is supposed to have forged a document. But Fouché completely refutes that he's forged any of his documents, and he's got hundreds of documents. So this is Fouché, in the US Air Force for many years, and as I say, worked on lots of different secret projects, and he worked at Area 51, the infamous Area 51. All right, now I'm going to go into some of the details of this secret aerial vehicle, triangular vehicle, and you'll notice there on this particular drawing or this diagram that it was like a kind of a purpley colour. Well, Fouché claims that they have a coating of quasi-crystals which can change their radar absorptiveness, and they can change their colour. So if you were to see one of these things, it would be blending in with the sky. So if you've seen it at night, it's going to be black. All right? If you've seen it during the day, it's going to be the same colour as the sky. And quasi-crystals, which Fouché spoke about in 1998, there's a guy recently just got the Nobel Prize for Physics or Chemistry in quasi-crystals. So he's talking about things before they've been released into the white world. And there are other reasons why I suspect Fouché is a genuine whistleblower, which I'm going to come on to. But before I do that, I'm just going to show you some evidence which backs up Ed Fouché's claims that people who've seen these 600 feet along one side triangular vehicles that are silent, they've been seen all over the place.
In 1988, a wave known as the Staffordshire Flap occurred at Cannock Chase. In March 1997, the Sheffield UFO incident took place.
We had 52 flying triangle incidents over Derby.
It took shape. It was a triangle, a big huge triangle with the lights all the way around the edge, and it went over my flat.
What I noticed is it was sort of rotating like that.
I saw this massive, great big black triangle sitting in there. A huge black triangular object.
I realised it was this black triangular shaped object.
It's the size of it's massive, like a great big football field.
It must have been at least a football field in size.
Almost the size of a football pitch.
So the size of 3 football pitches.
Just added off.
Right.
But there were no sound at all.
I could see then it was a triangle.
It was absolutely massive. And in the centre was a small cluster of red and orange, like honeycomb arrangement of lights.
And there was one red one in the centre.
One light at each corner and the big light in the middle.
Pretty much dead on what I saw, to be honest.
And it was at this point that the triangle tilted up in the air, but it rose, like I say, like a submarine underwater.
It travelled fast and, most strangely, was completely silent. Overall dimensions approximately the size of a football pitch.
And it actually came down in the road and hovered about 10 foot, stood there staring at it.
Now these statements are all from a film I made last year called Almost Identified Flying Objects. And also in that film I reported on the Belgian UFO flap of 1990. And in the film we've screened some video of Professor Emil Schweitzer, because the Belgian Air Force actually chased some of these triangles that were appearing in the skies over Belgium, and they captured them on radar. So the radar data was given to Belgium's top radar expert. He examined the data. He said, yes, they're definitely real objects, and we can't understand how they're performing these particular manoeuvres. And it was a bit of a scoop to get this particular footage of Professor Emil Schweitzer from David Caton, who got it from researcher Harry Harris.
Another wave of black triangles appeared in Belgium in 1990. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 fighters to try and intercept them, but were outmanoeuvred every time. After days of activity, the Belgian Air Force had no explanation, and to this day still have no explanation as to the origin of the triangular UFOs. After the events, an investigation was launched, and the airborne radar tips from the F-16s were given to radar expert Professor Emil Schweitzer. Schweitzer ruled out any form of radar anomaly and concluded the radar systems were tracking real objects. Calculations were carried out on the data, and in one manoeuvre the triangular craft turned a sharp corner, resulting in an acceleration of 30 g. That's 30 times greater than the Earth's gravity. This would be impossible for a conventional aircraft, and any occupants would be dead. Incredibly, in 1991, Schweitzer was asked by the British Ministry of Defence to come over to the UK to give British military chiefs a briefing on the movements of this unknown craft and explain the radar data. We know this because Schweitzer himself told researcher Harry Harris when Harris managed to get an interview with him in his hotel whilst in the UK.
What I found by calculations starting from the data recorded by the pilot, that the UFO made at one point of its trajectory a very strange motion. And during that very strange motion, the normal acceleration was, let's say, above 30 Gs. Yes. So the trajectory was, first of all, the UFO was flying almost level, and then suddenly made a 90-degree motion. At that point, where he made a 90-degree turn, that point, the normal acceleration was above 30 Gs. Climbed almost vertically, and then descended obliquely to the ground. During the oblique descent, the UFO was flying supersonic.
Is it reasonable to assume that there couldn't have been anything living in that machine, that UFO, as we understand life?
I would say that with the present human technology, that's impossible.
The MOD have never publicly admitted they requested a meeting with Schweitzer.
So he said, with present human technology, that would be impossible. I would change that. With present disclosed human technology, that would be impossible. Because I suspect that what we were seeing in the 1990 Belgian UFO flap was some version or other of the TR-3B. That's not to say that UFOs don't exist, because I think they do. And I'm going to come on to that. Now, okay, so let's have a look at Ed Fouché talking now. In this next clip, he talks about two space stations which have been put in orbit above the Earth that the NSA have not told anyone about. They haven't told the American government about them. And he also speaks about two different methods that the NSA had in the 1990s to go to and from these two particular satellites. One method was using the TR-3B, which I'm going to come on to. The other method was to use two conventional aircrafts, one on top of the other, the SR-75 and the SR-74. SR-74 would go on top of the SR-75. It would take off from a normal runway. It would go to a very high altitude and then would release the SR-74. The SR-74 could then actually get into space and go to these two space stations that they've not told anyone about. All right? But the SR-74 was not able to take off from the ground, so they needed the two conventional type aircraft with wings and jet engines to get this thing in orbit. So they don't need a space shuttle in order to get into orbit. And the TR-3B was the other vehicle that they were using to get into space.
Now, the NASA space shuttle, I'm here to tell you, is really an antique by comparison. The joke is on us. If you think these rumors are far-fetched, look at the YB-49 and the XB-70, flown in 1948 and 1964, respectively. Now look at the SR-75, which has been spotted numerous times. You say the government can't keep a secret? Boy, you're wrong. From my sources, two new vehicles have been placed in permanent orbit. One of these vehicles is the Space Orbital Nuclear Service Intercept Vehicle, SUN-SIV. When you hear it from another reliable source in 10 years, you'll remember this. It's codenamed Locust. The SR-74 and the TR-3B flying triangle can deliver spares, replacement units, service fuels, chemicals, and modules to the SUN-SIV, or Locust. The robotic SUN-SIV uses deliverables to service, calibrate, repair, and replace parts on the newer NSA, CIA, and NRO Ferret satellites. And I know for a fact that they were developing a robotic repair of electronics equipment as far back as '81, because I worked a program to where they didn't want technicians looking at the equipment.
So this is in 1998, he's saying all this, and he's not really being given a platform to air these particular disclosures. Right, now I mentioned before that the craft uses what's called a plasma accelerator. And this is what I think it would look like if we were to look inside it. So we're looking at it, let's say if we go over the prototype one, which was 200 feet along each side, you're looking at a 100 feet diameter tube, which is about 10 feet across. So you could probably walk around this structure inside there when it's powered down. In there, they fill it with a mercury-based plasma, which is a gas which has become ionized. Pressurize it to 150,000 atmospheres, which is extremely high pressure, or in the operational models, 250,000 atmospheres, and it's then spun around in a circle at 40,000 revolutions per minute, so 40,000 RPM. Right? So what you've got in a plasma, you've got charged particles, and you've got them going around very, very, very fast in a circle. Now, a charged particle which moves creates a magnetic field. If you have charge flowing in that direction, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it in that direction. So what you're going to get a magnetic field enveloping the whole craft of some phenomenal strength, which I'm going to come on to. Ed describes it as a magnetic vortex field. Now, the thing that enabled them to develop these plasma accelerators, allegedly, is the material that the device was made from, the thing that's withstanding this massive pressure. And he describes it as a foil-like material as thin as a plastic bag, which you can't cut with a knife. And they used 12 layers of it in this plasma accelerator. And this is what he talks about in this next clip.
Another friend who worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth described a program in which he worked a plasma accelerator in the mid-60s, researching gravity warping techniques. He is a physicist by education and trade. This was his first top secret program. He described a foil-like material, much like that discovered after Roswell crash. He described the foil as 12 layers of material less than 10,000ths of an inch thick. It was as flexible as a plastic trash bag, but virtually indestructible to piercing, burning, or cutting, which you've probably all heard before. Here's what you haven't heard. In order to cut the material used for the project, the material was supercooled, a large electrical charge was applied to polarize the molecular structure, and a laser cutter was applied in order to cut this material. Large ribbons of this material were used to reinforce the accelerator, which contained the mercury-based plasma that they started researching in 1965. The plasma was cooled to superconductive temperatures, rotated at 45,000 revolutions per minute, and pressurized at 150,000 atmospheres. This would be considered state-of-the-art technology even today.
All right. Now, in the next clip, he describes some of the characteristics of the craft, because they've made this plasma accelerator, they've got it to actually reduce its own weight. This magnetic vortex field is affecting the gravitational field around it, and is also presumably reducing inertial forces if the thing changes direction. So it's reducing its own mass. This is physics which is not in the white world. Anyway, he describes the characteristics in this next clip.
Was 200 feet across, the prototype. The Tactical Reconnaissance TR-3B first flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped, nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program. By 1994, there were $3 billion-plus operational models. The operational model is 600 feet across. This flying triangle is not fiction. If you don't believe me, ask the tens of thousands of people who have now spotted one version or another of it, from Belgium to England. Ken can tell you about people that have seen it in England to Arizona. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. The circular plasma field accelerator ring, called the magnetic field disruptor, surrounds a rotatable crew compartment. It's far ahead of anything you've ever imagined as far as technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed a reverse engineered MFD, and I believe the government will go at any lengths to protect this technology. The plasma in this accelerator is mercury-based. It's pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin, superconductivity, and accelerated to 60,000 revolutions per minute to create a superconductive plasma with the resulting gravity energy. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts and neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. This causes the effect of making the aircraft extremely light and able to outperform any aircraft yet constructed. TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with indefinite loiter time. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. With the vehicle's mass reduced by 89%, the vehicle can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally. So for those that have had sightings of things making right, and they're not perfect right turns, obviously. Nothing can make a perfect right turn. It's against the laws of physics. But it sure looks like a right turn at a distance.
So what he's saying is that the field generated by this plasma accelerator reduces the weight of the whole thing by 89%. So let's say you weigh 10 stone. If you stood in the middle, you weigh 1 stone. All right? And the whole craft's weight is reduced. Now, let's ask the question, does this seem plausible? Is there anything in our physics textbooks that we can verify this with and say, well, is he telling us the truth? Well, here's a science paper from 2010 entitled Generating a Magnetic Field by a Rotating Plasma, 12 years after Fouché's initial disclosures. So, yes, it is possible to generate a magnetic field by rotating a plasma. But is it possible to use a magnetic field for propulsion? The Lorentz force is the magnetic force in physics. So in electric motors, you have two components which you pass electricity through. Each produces a magnetic field, and it's the force between those fields that turns your electric motor, your lawnmower, your washing machine, what have you. But can you use that force to make something float off the ground? It's not that easy because the Lorentz force requires two components, one which pushes the other apart. So if you try to use it for propulsion, the component which is being pushed upwards will leave the thing that's pushing it. So it's a bit like trying to lift yourself up off a chair and float in midair. You can't do it. But according to Fouché, if you get the magnetic field strong enough and in this configuration of a magnetic vortex field, I would imagine it's something the shape of, because every magnetic field has a shape, it has topology, right? So the shape would be something like water going down a plug hole. And I suspect it requires a field which is of immense strength before it starts to affect gravity. And I'm going to come on to that now. Let's just ask the question, if we were able to rotate a plasma at 40,000 RPM, as Ed Fouché claims, what would the strength of the magnetic field? Now we can ask that question by comparing it to electricity in a wire. When you pass electricity down a wire, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it, going around that wire. The further away from the wire, the weaker the field. All right? Now you can put your wire in a circle and allow your electrons to flow around in a circle, very similar to the TR-3B. So you've got charged particles going around in a circle, just like the plasma accelerator. And it produces a magnetic field this shape, all the way around the ring. So it's something like that that the TR-3 is going to be generating. So B here is the magnetic field strength measured in Tesla. The equation for magnetic field strength for a charged particle flowing in a direction is given by this equation here. Mu naught over 4 pi times QV over R squared. Don't get frightened by that. It's not as complicated as you might think. Mu naught over 4 pi is a constant. Okay, so we can pretty much forget about that term. R is the distance from the charged particle to where you're measuring the field, right? So all this term means is the further away you get, the smaller the field. So we can forget that term. The two important terms is V, that's the velocity of your charge, the speed of your electrons, and Q, the number of electrons, how much charge is there. So in a copper wire with DC current flowing down it, electrons flow at 0.735 millimeters per second. Electrons will flow at 0.7 of a millimeter in 1 second. That's how fast electrons go down the wire, right? Now let's compare that speed, V, with a plasma in Fouché's accelerator. He said it was 100 feet in diameter, and he said it was going around at 40,000 RPM. That comes out at a speed of 64,000 meters per second, compared to 0.00735 meters per second. So the plasma, or the charged particles in the plasma accelerator, are travelling 87 million times faster than the electrons in a copper wire. So if the other factors in this equation were the same, it means that B, the magnetic field strength, is going to be 87 million times that of the field produced by a wire. Now let's look at the other term. So do we have the same amount of charge in a plasma though? Well, the charge in copper, or the electron density, is 8.4 times 10 to the 22 electrons in every cubic centimetre of copper. How does that compare with a plasma? Well, the electron density in a plasma depends on the type of plasma, and it depends on the temperature. But looking at this graph, if we just look at the electron density of 10 to the 22 here, right, we see that metals, or metal plasmas, exist at about, in other words, supercooled. Fouché said that the plasma accelerator was cooled to 150 degrees Kelvin. That's about minus 120 odd centigrade. So this is all making sense to me. The electron density of metals, because this was a metal-based plasma, it's a mercury-based plasma, supercooled, would produce a similar electron density to that of copper. So that's why they've probably got to supercool it, so that the plasma can obtain that particular electron density. So from those figures, I would suggest that the magnetic field strength using this plasma would be thousands of times higher than using wire and copper. Sorry, using wire and electricity. Now, this table here shows typical magnetic field strengths, fixed magnetic field strengths, because you can't have pulsed magnetic fields, but I think we're talking about fixed magnetic fields. If you've got something going around in a circle at a fixed speed, the field is going to be fixed. It's not going to be pulsed. So a typical magnetic field in a power transformer is between 1 and 2 Tesla. Tesla is the unit of magnetic field strength. I particularly like this one. Where is it? Strength. Yeah, 16 Tesla is the magnetic field strength used to levitate a frog. Right, but the strongest magnetic field ever produced in a laboratory, this is a fixed magnetic field, not a pulsed one, ever produced in a laboratory, is 45 Tesla. And that's it. So I think they're producing fields with the TR3B of thousands of Tesla. So there's no physicist can stand here and say to me, well, if you get a magnetic vortex field of, say, 10,000 Tesla, it will not affect gravity. They can't say that because they've never produced one in a laboratory. And the reason why they've never produced one in a laboratory is because they haven't got the materials that they used in that TR3B plasma accelerator. So has Ed Fouché taken all of this into account when he's made up his story? I don't think so. Now, they have produced pulsed magnetic fields in the order of thousands of Tesla, a few thousand Tesla, but they've blown the laboratory up. Because with a pulsed magnetic field, you get voltages induced, and they just blow everything up. But a fixed magnetic field, I think, is what we're talking about. So this is all adding up to me. And just to reiterate, no scientist can say to you that if you had a fixed magnetic vortex field of, let's say, 10,000 Tesla, that it wouldn't suddenly interrupt gravity, because they've never done it in a lab. Okay? Now, Ed said that these craft were capable of Mach 9, that's 6,900 miles per hour, not just horizontally, but vertically. At that speed, from a standing start, you'd be in space in 40 seconds. A 600 feet triangle in space, in orbit in 40 seconds. And we were all shown the space shuttle on TV. 10, 9, 8, 7. It is a big, big con. Now, if we imagine that they've increased this capability, because we're talking about 1990 here, these capabilities. Let's say they've increased the capability by tenfold. you're talking 70,000 miles per hour, right? That would take you under 4 hours to get to the moon, and it would take you just 3 weeks to get to Mars. Now, if you've got a 600 feet platform that you can get to the moon in a few hours, you can put it on the surface of the moon, use it as a base, take it to Mars, take it to any planet in the solar system, do you think that they're not going to do that? Or do you think they're just going to put it in a cupboard and let it gather dust? I think they've been there and they've got the T-shirt. One person who made claims about this in 1998 was a guy called William Hamilton.
This colonel is a real warrior type guy, and he had a degree in plasma physics. And he was also a consultant to NASA, and he was a consultant to people out at the Palos Verdes nuclear power generating station just 50 miles west of Phoenix. The other thing he said was there was a base on the moon. I find that quite astounding. I mean, I have heard astounding things, not only from this colonel, okay, but also probably the highest rank was a retired 3-star general, lieutenant general in the Air Force. And he knew another guy that I was in contact with, and this other guy claims that he worked 7 years on the U.S. anti-gravity program. I have a fraction of what he told me, and I've got it tape recorded. It's true. Whoa. What a sham the space program is. Because there's another space program going on. A secret space program. And that's what I was attempting to find. In fact, you don't have to go too far to find that there is some secret space programs going on, because they had their own shuttles and their own astronaut crews right out here at Vandenberg Air Force Base, unbeknownst to everybody, and they scuttled a $5 billion facility that was housed there at one time. That was back in the 80s. But the kind of space program he was talking about is using a spacecraft that can leave the bounds of our atmosphere and travel to the planet Mars at 0.8 C, 0.8 the speed of light. And I said, how do you know that? I've been there, he said.
All right, now we might ask the question, well, what the hell is NASA all about if this stuff is going on? What are NASA doing? Well, I'm going to show you a clip of Barack Obama speaking at the Kennedy Space Center in 2010. And Obama is laying out NASA's program of work for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I just want you to consider technology for a moment, your communications technology, your mobile phone, and compare it to the 1960s and 1950s and how much it has advanced. It's incredible, isn't it, what we have now in communications technology. But compare that to propulsion. We had rockets that we could control and get into space in the 1940s. 1940s. NASA is still using rockets now. It seems that there's been no advancement in their technology with regards to propulsion. And I think it's because NASA is a cover organization which is just presenting technology to keep the public passive as to space, and to not question about what's going on that the NSA and the Air Force are developing, because they're running the real space program, not NASA. And what I've done with this clip of Barack Obama is I've put on the screen here what I think is really going on. So listen to Obama's words. You might need to stand up at the back to see them, but if you read the bottom of the screen, this is what I think the real picture is, and Obama is just part of one massive cover-up.
We're no longer racing against an adversary. We're no longer competing to achieve a singular goal like reaching the moon. In fact, what was once a global competition has long since become a global collaboration. By doing that, we will ramp up robotic exploration of the solar system, including a probe of the sun's atmosphere, new scouting missions to Mars and other destinations, and an advanced telescope to follow Hubble, allowing us to peer deeper into the universe than ever before. We will increase Earth-based observation to improve our understanding of our climate and our world. And we will extend the life of the International Space Station, likely by more than 5 years, while actually using it for its intended purpose. And in order to reach the space station, we will work with a growing array of private companies competing to make getting to space easier and more affordable. We will build on the good work already done on the Orion crew capsule. I've directed Charlie Bolden to immediately begin developing a rescue vehicle using this technology, and this Orion effort will be part of the technological foundation for advanced spacecraft to be used in future deep space missions. In fact, Orion will be readied for flight right here in this room. We will invest more than $3 billion to conduct research on an advanced heavy lift rocket, a vehicle to efficiently send into orbit the crew capsules, propulsion systems, and large quantities of supplies needed to reach deep space. In developing this new vehicle, we will not only look at revising or modifying older models, we want to look at new designs, new materials, new technologies that will transform not just where we can go, but what we can do when we get there. And we will finalize a rocket design no later than 2015 and then begin to build it. And by 2025, we expect new spacecraft designed for long journeys to allow us to begin the first ever crewed missions beyond the moon into deep space. We'll start by sending astronauts to an asteroid for the first time in history. By the mid-2030s, I believe we can send humans to orbit Mars and return them safely to Earth. And a landing on Mars will follow, and I expect to be around to see it. Critical to deep space exploration will be the development of breakthrough propulsion systems and other advanced technologies. So I'm challenging NASA to break through these barriers. And we'll give you the resources to break through these barriers. And I know you will, with ingenuity and intensity, because that's what you've always done.
Yeah. He's just a slightly more sophisticated version of Ed Miliband. Being used to cover things up. All right, now I mentioned UFOs before, and if you listen to what Ed Fouché said, he said that the plasma accelerator was back-engineered. Right? What he means is that they recovered a downed flying saucer, they took it apart, and they found a plasma accelerator in there. So they started to build one themselves. They didn't quite know what was going to happen when they built it. They actually chained it down because they were expecting it to take off. Okay? But they couldn't get it to take off. They could only get it to reduce its weight by 89%. And that's why the triangle, that's why they made it into the shape of a triangle and put conventional type thrusters in each corner. What they were trying to do was make a flying saucer when they were developing the TR-3B originally. All right? And for those who have not researched the UFO subject, it might come as a surprise to you that UFOs are real. The evidence is voluminous for those who haven't looked into it. And not only that, there is a dark side to the UFO subject, which is probably one of the reasons why the subject is covered up, and that is to do with mutilations. As I say, it goes into a whole other area which many people don't really want to know about. And you may have seen my film UFOs and NATO, the human mutilation cover-up, where I present the disclosures of an ex-military guy who was involved in a special forces unit run by NATO. This particular organisation has, he claimed, 8 weapons situated in the US, Germany and the UK that use some kind of non-ballistic weapon system, so either an energy weapon or based on a laser, some kind of electromagnetic thing that they can point at a UFO and it will then interfere with its propulsion system. Now if you think that they've actually developed their own propulsion systems, they're going to know how to disable them, and they are electromagnetic or gravitational in nature, right? So a non-ballistic type metal, a weapon, would bring them to the ground. And this is allegedly what they've been firing at UFOs. So what they do is, and the military source did not know how they know when and where UFOs are going to appear, but they have intelligence as to when and where they're going to appear. They'll send that team out to a particular part of the world, they'll be on standby in a helicopter, and then they'll fire this weapon. and there have been crash retrievals in the 1990s, and there's been retrievals on the Brecon Beacons not far from here. This is a reconstruction of 2 bodies that were discovered on the Brecon Beacons, a 21-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl, who I believe I can't 100% say I've got the date, right? But I think this newspaper article is talking about this. And I just want to put out an appeal, because I'm in this part of the world. This is in 1990, the 20th of August. I'm just going to read this report. Police used their new helicopter. This is from the Brecon and Radnor Express, and that's the date, 20th of August 1990. Police used their new helicopter and dogs in their search for a London man missing at Lambetta, Crickhowell on Monday. The man, who has not been named by the police, hired a car in London to visit friends in the Crickhowell and Swansea areas. The car was found with its lights illuminated and its engine running. There was no sign of the man. The man was later found in London in a confused state. Now, I don't buy all of that story, especially the man being found in London in a confused state, because I've spoken to a farmer from Lambetta who knew about this incident, and he said to me that there wasn't one person in the car, there was 2. And he also said that they definitely did not find anyone in connection with it. So there's a vehicle there, lights on, engine running, and then at some point later the military have recovered 2 bodies from Brecon Beacon with all the hair removed, all the blood removed. The female had her breasts surgically removed, they both had their genitals removed. Ghastly stuff, but that was covered up. Those bodies were taken to MOD St Athens, and then who knows where after then. So I'm trying to find evidence that there is 2 people that have gone missing. They might not be Welsh, they might be English, because it was the holiday season. And I have found evidence of something very suspicious which happened at MOD St Athens just 2 weeks after this event. A woman was found in a car with her 2 children, 3 of them dead, after this, 2 weeks after. And she lived on the military houses at that estate. And I'm also trying to find her husband, because I believe he was probably an RAF serviceman. So, evidence such as in my film UFOs and NATO, or the real story of the TR-3B, or other things about UFOs, why don't we hear about it in the mainstream media? Well, I have been approached by mainstream media more than once to take part in their documentaries. And I received an email in May this year from Plum Pictures. Now, Plum Pictures are currently in the process of producing a new documentary about the UFO phenomenon for Channel 4. Or in particular, it's about the ET cover-up. That's what they've described it as. So this email says, Plum Pictures are in the process of making a film about the ET cover-up, and I wanted to talk in more detail with you about your possible involvement. So this is Channel 4 wanting me to be one of the talking heads in their UFO documentary. But I have not agreed to take part. And this clip that I'm going to show you was a telephone call of me talking to the production company, and you'll understand from this phone call why we never get any truth on our television.
Hello, Joanna speaking.
Hello, Joanna. My name's Richard Hall. I got an email from you asking if I was interested in taking part in a film that you're making.
Oh, hi, Richard. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, thanks for giving me a call. I was just about to kind of try and hunt you down, because that number on your site isn't...
Yeah, that doesn't work anymore.
Doesn't go through anymore. So, shall I tell you a little bit about what we're doing?
Yeah, sure.
We are making a documentary for Channel 4 about the ET cover-up / conspiracy, and it's a presenter-led film. We've got a guy called Dan Schreiber who is kind of taking us on this journey, and he is one of the head writers on QI, and he produces Museum of Curiosity on Radio 4, so he's kind of he's not an expert in the field by any means, but he's really interested in it, in this whole topic. So we've been going around the country speaking to various different people and getting their views and theories on what's going on with regards to aliens and extraterrestrials, and how, if there is, how it's being covered up by the government or other parties involved. And I just wanted to, a few people have mentioned your name, and I know you run quite a big website, not just with regards to ETs, but with the whole kind of truth movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to kind of get your take on the whole thing and see if you would be interested in talking to us. Okay,
well, can I ask a few questions?
Sure.
So you mentioned ET cover-up.
Yeah.
So that expresses two things to me. It's saying whoever's making the film must believe that extraterrestrials exist and that they're being covered up. Do you believe those two things?
I personally am open-minded. I'm not really. I don't really know either way, but obviously this film has been a learning curve for us.
Okay, so if you're passionate enough to make a Channel 4 program and get it commissioned, how can you possibly not believe in what you're actually producing?
Well, it's an exploration of the different theories out there. It's not saying this is definitely happening or this is definitely happening. It's looking at going to speak to the different people.
All right, okay, so it's more about looking at the people rather than trying to find the truth on their evidence.
No, it's examining the theories.
Okay.
Dan gets really excited about all the different theories.
Right. Okay.
We're not making a decision about whether they're true or not. We're just kind of examining the different layers of the theories.
Okay. Now you mentioned in your email ET cover up.
That's
our
top line.
What will the title of the program be?
Something along those lines. That is our working title.
No. Well, what is the title that will appear on Channel 4?
Oh, I have no idea. That's something that Channel 4 will decide. The edit.
The reason why I asked that is because the last one was called Confessions of an Alien Abductee, and no one was told what it was going to be called. So it's debunking the subject just in the title before they've even got into the documentary.
Okay, so you can't even give me that. Okay, all right.
The working title, as I said, and it will be on the contributor release form, is Dan Schreiber Project: The Big ET Cover-Up, and our top line is Cover-Up Conspiracy. That's our angle.
And so do you know when it will air?
No, I don't. It will be later on this year.
Okay.
But everything we have to give Channel 4 everything by in kind of a few weeks' time. So it will be later this year, but I can't say when.
Right. Now you mentioned my website, and as you said, there's a lot of information on there. And I've produced 49 TV shows which cover the UFO subject.
Yeah.
And I've made 7 feature-length films.
Yeah.
And they're all evidence-based. Okay. Now I see that you've been to film Miles Johnson at the Basis Conference. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Miles Johnson is not a serious researcher. He promotes fantasists and people who are delusional. I don't know why he does that. I have a theory on that, but there's no way I would be associated with any documentary that features the likes of Miles Johnson, because you might as well go to a circus if you're going to put people like him on. So there's no way I would agree to be in the same TV show as Miles Johnson. Now the other thing would be, I would only agree to take part if you gave me editorial control of the programme. Would you be prepared to do that?
No, absolutely. I can't. It's just not within my right to do that.
Would you be able to request that from because obviously you did say that I have you did.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, I would like to view the program that you intend to air before it airs.
Yeah.
So that I could have a final say in whether it airs or not. So that if there's any.
That's just not something that broadcasters do. It just isn't done. You can't give contributors the right to say, actually, change this, change that.
I understand that's how the way you work, but I also believe that is that's why we never get any truth on television. Because your industry works in that way. I don't work that way when I produce television programs. I let people see what I'm going to air, and if they're not happy with it, I will change it.
I can show you things as we're going along, perhaps, but I could never give you editorial control.
Your industry has a history of trapping people into making these kind of documentaries and then ridiculing them on screen. That's why. No, that is. I can give you a list of people who will make that claim.
Who will what? Sorry.
Who will make that claim that they were trapped into making a documentary
Oh, I'm not claiming that I'm being trapped into making any sort of documentary. I just wanted to kind of... I want you to know that the documentary that we're making doesn't have an agenda, and it's not setting out to ridicule anyone, and we have quite a strict duty of care.
Okay, well...
That we don't want to ridicule people and make fun of people.
So, right, there will be a single-page programme proposal for this documentary then, yes?
Well, not really, no.
The industry works on programme proposals, so there must be.
Well, there are treatments written and submitted to Channel 4, yes, in the development stages. But
Right.
again,
Would you be able to email me all of those treatments that have been emailed to Channel 4 so I can have a look at them to see what it is that you're trying to make in this programme?
Sure, I can email you some information about the programme, absolutely. But it's going to be exactly what I just told you. We're exploring the ET phenomenon, specifically the cover-up and conspiracy surrounding the subject. We're making a non-judgmental documentary about the different theories that are out there, and we don't have any specific agenda.
Right. Well, if you're going to screen Miles Johnston in the Basis Conference, you're not making a non-judgmental program. I mean, you might as well go to the circus if you're going to screen that. That is not a non-judgmental documentary on the ET cover-up. Because that conference is not about the ET cover-up.
No.
It's a rodeo show.
That was more research than anything else, if I'm being honest with you. And obviously, I can't say what's going to end up in the final edit or not. But
okay, well, if you're not prepared to give me any editorial control, then
I'm afraid I can't do that.
Right. Okay. Well, there's no way that I would. That's the only condition.
I can't give you editorial control of a programme that we're making for Channel 4. It just doesn't work like that.
Well, I know it doesn't work like that, and that's what's wrong with the television industry.
Okay. Well, I don't think we're going to get anywhere in that case. I mean, it's totally up to you. I don't want to coerce you into doing anything. I just thought it would be interesting to speak to you.
Okay.
I know that you have some kind of on current great theories, and you're good at talking.
They're not. It's not theories. I present evidence.
Yeah. Well.
And can I advise that you watch, but please do not take any content from the UFOs and NATO, the human mutilation cover-up, because there are people who are being mutilated and left in remote places in connection with UFOs, and the military have tried to fire particular weapons at UFOs.
Yeah, and it was
right. This is an extremely serious subject which you should not be ridiculing, which it sounds like you are to me. Well, if you want to treat it seriously, then you should be giving the likes of me editorial control.
I mean, you can't say that.
Yes, well, I just have said it.
You can't say that that I'm ridiculing the subject.
Well, okay. Well, I tell you what. Well, let me judge that when you produce what you produce, because every other program that's appeared on Channel 4 of this nature has been a ridicule attempt.
Okay, I mean, we're trying to tread a different path here, but there's only...
Well, I don't believe you.
I can only try and reassure you. I can only... This is all... I'm doing all I can. When all I'm saying is I'd like you to be involved, but there's just no way that I can give you editorial control.
Right, well, there's no way I can take part then. Okay.
Okay, that's
all right.
Fine.
Thank you. Bye. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
All right, so get some beers in for that one later this year. God knows what it's going to be like. Now, you might think I've been a little bit harsh on Miles Johnson with those comments, but I'm just going to give you some information. The last documentary that they made, as I said, was called Confessions of an Alien Abductee. And about 18 months before Channel 4 made that documentary, there was an organisation set up called AMASH. Anyone heard of it? Anomalous Mind Management Abductee Contactee Helpline. And that was set up by Miles Johnson and a few other people. And their role was to interview people who claim to have had abduction-type experiences, film them on camera, and have meetings and all the rest of it. So they built up a database of people who make these kind of claims. And Miles, was the person who collaborated with Channel 4 to get their subjects into that Channel 4 documentary, where those people were made to look foolish on screen. And I know that one woman was extremely annoyed at that. All right? So he was instrumental in that previous debunking attempt. Now, they actually contacted me, that same production company that were making that programme, and they wanted to use the David Cameron clip. Anyone seen the clip where I challenged David Cameron on UFOs? They wanted to put that in Confessions of an Alien Abductee. And I said, well, I want you to show David Cameron's apology. I want you to read out the letter that David Cameron wrote to me personally. I want you to show the whole thing in its context, so it's not being used as a ridicule attempt. And they didn't show it. Right? Not that I wanted them to. I just give them all my conditions as them showing that, and they didn't. And then I got wind that Miles was collaborating with Mainstream on this. And I discussed it with Miles. I've got all the emails. I said to him, Miles, why are you getting involved with Channel 4? This is going to be an absolute debunking attempt of the abduction phenomenon. Oh, Richard, you have to give them a chance. We have to give them a chance. I said, no way, Miles. You know what's going on here. So I disagreed with his decision to collaborate with Channel 4 before the last documentary was made. Now, Miles Johnson is no longer operating under the name of MASH. He's operating under his old name, which is Bases. And I would suggest the reason why he's doing that is because the name of a MASH was trashed in that documentary by Channel 4. But he's now operating under a new name. And he held a little conference recently where he's allowed Plum Pictures into that conference to film every nutter that he's had on that stage and take whatever content that they want from to make another documentary. So he's doing exactly the same again. Right? So I don't think I'm being harsh on Miles Johnson with my comments in that. I suspect a MASH was set up specifically for that Channel 4 documentary. There's a honeypot for people who make such claims so they can pick out the ones they're going to debunk and put them on TV. So who is Miles Johnson? He's trying to persuade me to take part in hit pieces like this. Just like Ed Miliband, right? We should not be negotiating with Ed Miliband because he is not the leader. Just as these people are not the leaders. They're flunkies. Because it will be the intelligence agencies who are behind the making of such documentaries to try and get people to think there's nothing to the UFO phenomenon when there is. Right? These are professional piss takers. And he wants me to go grovelling to them. Right? We should not be collaborating with these people. We should be exposing them. Thank you.